Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. I'm super excited to share this recipe with you. I have been looking for this recipe for so long. This was one of my favourite cakes from my childhood and I cannot find the recipe on the internet. Anyway, last week I was in Melbourne and I asked my mum to contact an old dear friend of hers, and lo and behold, she found her old handwritten cookbook and the recipe was there. So this will be the third time that I make this in a week, and I wanted to put it on this channel so I can share it with the world and we all know how to make this old-fashioned but so delicious recipe for chocolate apple slice. Here goes. So the first thing I do is take a 400 gram tin of pie apples. Pie apples, not to be confused with apple slices because these have too much juice in them, or 1.5 cup of stewed apples. And all you have to do for that is I take about 1 kilo of apples and I peel them and cut them into slices, put them into a pot, put about 1 cup of water in them, bring it to a boil and simmer them until they're tender. This usually takes about 20 minutes. But pie apples are easier and they're just as delicious. So either or, whatever you have available. So to the pie apples, I add 1.5 teaspoons of bicarb soda and I give that a good mix and it will foam up a little bit, and that's what we're after. And I set that aside. Then I take 120 grams of butter, or 4 ounces. And you'd like the butter nice and soft. You can sap it in the microwave or you can leave it out in the sun for 5 minutes. And then I add 1 cup of sugar. And using a spoon, I cream that. When I was a child, the old-fashioned way of creaming butter and sugar was to fill a sink with hot water and put it over the hot water until the butter melted. These days we have microwaves and everything like that. But still the old-fashioned way works a treat. And this only takes a couple of minutes. Now I add my apples. And then I put a sifter over the bowl and I add 2 cups of self-raising flour. Now if you don't have self-raising flour, you just can add 2 cups of plain flour and 4 teaspoons of baking powder, and it's the same thing. 2 big tablespoons of cocoa powder, another 1/2 teaspoon of bicarb powder, and you'll need cream of tartar. So 1 teaspoon of cream of tartar and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. And I sift that into the apples and the butter and the sugar mixture. And I give that a mix. So there's no milk and no eggs in this recipe. All the moisture comes from the apples and the butter and the sugar. The recipe says 1/2 to 3/4 cup of sultanas. So I add about 3/4 cup of sultanas and I stir that in, and that's the cake done. So it's a slice, so I like using a slice tin, but at my mum's place she didn't have a slice tin, so I just put it in a springform pan that worked beautiful. And I just grease it with a little bit of butter, just a little bit because I'm going to put baking paper in here, but the butter helps the baking paper stick. And then the mixture into the tin. And I get a spatula to make sure I get every little bit. And you can add more apples. The other day I actually doubled the quantity of the apples, and more like a dessert than a cake. It was really good though. And that's the cake component. So I pop it into the oven, 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and I bake it for between 30 to 45 minutes. And while the cake is baking, I make a quick icing. I tip some icing sugar into a bowl, and then I add a little bit of softened butter, suppose about a tablespoon. And then I add a couple of tablespoons of cocoa powder, depending how chocolatey you like it. And then I add just a little bit of boiling water. I can always add more. And I mix that around. Sometimes I add milk instead of water. And I give it a good mix, making a bit of a mess. Just a tiny little bit more water. And that's my 2-minute icing done. Delicious. So mine took about 40 minutes. And you can test it with a wire skewer just to see if anything comes out. And if it comes out more or less clean, then it's ready. And I'll let that cool down before I add the chocolate icing. So that's been about 10 minutes. And my icing's gone a bit stiff, so I'll just add a touch more water. And then I'll put the icing on top of the slice. And what I wanted to say was this translates beautifully to gluten-free. I actually use gluten-free flour and it works fantastic. And I think it could easily be adapted to vegan because there's no eggs and milk. And if you use like a Nuttelex or a vegan butter, I think that recipe would then be vegan. So it's really easy. And you know, you can add more apples if you want. You could change up the flour, like if you wanted to make it super healthy, you could use flaxseed meal or something like that. But I wanted to show you the original version, and there you go.